Welcome to Spirit Talks, because your spirit talks to you.
Hello and welcome to Spirit Talks. I'm Susie Beiler.
And I'm Maximilliam Haver.
Today's Spirit Talk topic is the shadow.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy.
Max, what would you say the shadow is?
The shadow being the experience of polarity to the true self. The true self is made of light and love, and the shadow is the reflection of that in polarity, so the absence of light. This can be there's many aspects of the shadow, both in yourself and your outer reality that you experience. More specifically, the shadow self is a reflection of your own qualities that are sometimes exploring the denser energies and emotions and thought forms and that sort of thing. So that's a general idea of the shadow as well as the shadow self. Do you want to elaborate on those ideas?
I think that was a pretty good explanation. We hear the term integrating the shadow. What do you think that means?
Well, specifically, that usually refers to integrating aspects of the shadow self, such as integrating your anger or integrating your fears or integrating any sort of jealousy, just any sort of these dense, heavy emotions that have energies that grab at you, that pull at you, and that they're wanting your attention. They're wanting you to learn a lesson, to grow through it, and from that you become empowered and no longer are held back by those energies.
Okay, so when you integrate something, then you can then use it instead of it sabotaging you.
Yeah, well, you can recognize it for what it is. You can be empowered to choose whether to be in that energy or not, as well as the understanding of how others are going through it and how to assist them, and also how this makes you aware of different parts of yourself that you weren't aware of before. That's also part of why it's the shadow, because it's elusive, it's deceptive, it's hidden.
Yeah.
And so part of that self-discovery is going inwards and discovering those things about yourself.
Do you think as we travel this ascension journey that eventually we integrate the shadow and we no longer have it because we integrate all of it?
Well, as long as you're in polarity, you have a shadow. That's just what polarity is. And once you're in unity, you no longer have a shadow. And this has been shared by some, that when they're in astral travel and they go to places that have rules of unity, there actually aren't shadows from objects. Like the physical light there has different rules and properties. And so everything appears to be self-luminous and has a more vibrant color to it. And best way to visualize it is sort of like if you've ever played a video game and there's shadows in the game and you can turn them on and off, and that changes the visual experience of something with and without shadows. Obviously, there's still contrast.
Do we have
a
button like that for this life?
Well,
just turn on polarity
as you transition it, and so you've had experience with this in your trip to Telos, if you wish to share about that.
Oh, yeah, there was just this beautiful golden light everywhere. For those who don't know, Telos is a fifth-dimensional inner Earth city. Yeah, it was just this beautiful light, and the colors were more vibrant and a little bit different than what we experience here in this dimension. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know anyone in this dimension that doesn't have a shadow?
I'm not certain that you can be in this place of polarity without having a shadow. I think it's one of the rules of being here. And so maybe there are people that have very or the majority of it integrated, and they choose not to experience certain things, certain dense experiences, that's, in theory, you could have a state of being that never chooses that, but I don't think you would be unable to access it. So you'd still be at choice.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how to integrate the shadow, because this is like where we get into the practical inner work here. My understanding and what I've been doing is when something comes up for me of density, I take some time to look at it, to understand what it is, maybe where it comes from, what the wisdom of it is, or what growth opportunity there is in that. And I spend the time with it that I need to until I get the understanding that I need to move on, to transmute it, to let it go, whatever. Do you have a process that you use?
I've come up with a process that I spent quite a bit of time observing the shadow and how it works as far as the shadow self. Basically, I look at what the energy is doing and how it's networking thought forms and emotion through a very particular, it has sort of a structure, and then there's some intuitive work and questioning you have to go through with yourself. But it always starts with not knowing something. That's the basis of the shadow self. If it's known, then there isn't anything to be deceived about. So
Right.
First you start with something that you don't know, and then from there the shadow is able to twist it further and further and further until it gets into negative thought forms and negative emotions. So there's something you do not know, and from that you can have a misunderstanding. And then from a misunderstanding you can have a doubt, and then from a doubt you can form distrust, and within distrust is a second energy, which is aversion. And so what the shadow self can do is it can amplify this aversion into a fear. And once you have fear, you can then access pretty much any negative thought form or negative emotion. So if you're ever stuck on figuring out what your fears are, look at your distrusts. And just because you have a distrust doesn't mean absolutely it's a fear, but the majority of your distrusts are going to be related to that list of fears. And so it's much easier for the ego to admit what it distrusts rather than to admit what it fears.
That's true.
And so it makes this search in the shadow self much quicker and easier. And if you're ever wanting to come back to center, to recognize that you need to let go of your distrusts and let go of your distractions, and that can bring you to a centered place much quicker than having to fight with your fears.
It's a very powerful process. I remember when you actually kind of went through the process of figuring out what the process was. And it's very powerful to know what it is that you distrust. Because once you figure that out, you can find, you can remedy it. But it's very powerful to have these understandings about yourself, and then when you can figure out what's going on, then you can figure out how to move forward. Because what I love about your approach is that it's so logical, and in some ways it takes the emotion out of it. So for a highly emotional person like myself, if I need to get to the core issue, if I'm in an emotional state, there's a lot of convolution from the emotion. But what your process does is it takes the emotion out of it. So you can get to the core a lot more quickly, and you can figure out very easily what is it that I distrust, and then you can do your integration from that point.
And I guess in part what would be helpful is understanding how this actually comes about from, once you understand how the energy is working in the emotion or the thought form, you then can approach it with an understanding from its perspective. And then from there, you can have an empowerment because you know what it's doing and why it's doing it, and then you're at choice. It's no longer something that holds power over you.
Yeah.
And so that's a basic understanding of how it releases you from these energies and patterns. And so, would you like to do an example?
I was just thinking we should share an example.
Yeah.
Well, say your sibling says something, maybe derogatory to you.
Mm-hmm.
And your shadow self gets all in a tizzy, like, how could they say that? That's not true. Who are they to say? You get an emotional charge. You're triggered by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's your job to get to the core of that. Okay, what is this really about? Because the comment was most likely a projection, probably has nothing to do with you, but because you're triggered, then there's something for you to look at. So then you do your process. Okay, what is it that I'm triggered about? What's the core issue? What don't I trust? And then you can let that go.
It's nice, good, simple.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complex. It's, in my understanding, it's the emotion that can make things complex. Because emotion can convolute things. And, I mean, I know I experience that a lot for myself. Once I really start to get emotional, I can, lose my bearings and any logic and any, because I'm feeling the emotion. I'm in the emotion of it. And it can be hard to find my way to what the core issue is.
Yes, and whenever you're having the emotion and you're in it, recognize that the emotion will network through many different energies. And so starting with the not knowing, misunderstanding, doubt, distrust, and fear is pretty much always the base of the negative thought form or negative emotion. Then from fear, it spins off through different stages and different, sometimes different points of focus, such as people or situations or patterns that are old habits or traumas or any sorts of things that it might network with. So it's usually not just one thing, but it's networked. And so understanding the whole network of it is sort of understanding how and why it does what it does.
Yeah.
So from fear, you can go into having a energy of conflict that you're trying to avoid something. So you have a effort to avoid something, and then this can go into how do you avoid it? You can run from it. You can fight it. And then from there, you can get into anger because you're angry about it, or you can get into
self-defeat or
self-defeat
something.
or these sorts of things, or anxiety. And then from there, you can get into hate. You can get into self-loathing. And so it networks in this way. It attaches
and then it's
multiple...
spiraling out of control.
Right.
Before you know it, you're feeling like you're a mess.
Right. And so this is why often people find it difficult if they're sometimes trying to understand, how can I be afraid of something if I'm really jealous about something or I'm angry about something? Because they don't understand how it's networked up to that point.
Good point.
Right. And so once you go through the process with a few different things working internally, you begin to understand how it can relate all the way back through these different energies.
Wow, this is actually very powerful information. I might have to go back and listen to this again. Is there anything else you wanted to share about the shadow or integrating the shadow?
The shadow being part of polarity is really why we're here experiencing what we experience. It's to explore beyond the light. And so going into the darkness is sometimes not comfortable, but it allows you to expand your understanding as being in a place of unity, you don't have understanding of polarity.
Right.
You can perhaps perceive it from a different level, but the perception and perspective of it is very different. And so inexperience, being intimately here in a body in this polarity, is what you're exploring in this lifetime, and that expands your mastery, and that expands your capacity to retain love while in all these dense energies, because you're expanding that mastery.
It really does come back to the mastery, doesn't it?
Mhm.
I mean, Prime Creators keeps mentioning that in every video, and it's really is, this is why we're here, to develop our mastery.
So when you see others exploring shadow, sometimes it's going to be very, very dense. Sometimes it's going to be very convoluted and confusing. People commit very destructive and, distracting energies, killing and rape and murder and war and all these things. And in that, they're exploring the shadow. That's what they're doing. And so not to have it weigh so heavy on yourself, and understanding that most souls have done these things at least some point in their journeys.
We've all done it.
Yeah. So understanding that they're on their path, and that they'll have lessons come up after they've set those energies forth for them to learn and master.
Right.
So
no judgment.
Yeah, and not to let it weigh so heavy on yourself,
Right.
because it's simply their exploration of creation. And to
In
be
fact,
on,
when we allow something to weigh heavy on ourselves, that's our shadow.
yeah, and that's also another good way to discover what's if something's drawing up a shadow aspect of yourself, is ask yourself what feels heavy about this. That's another good way to approach it. So, some good tools.
Very good words of wisdom, Max. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you in the next episode.
May you grow to understand and love yourself in both your light and shadow, and reap the rewards and growth.